She said I was too young, too naive to ever succeed. And honestly, I believed her until I found my late father's $20 a month investment plan hidden in an old bank file. My wife once looked me straight in the eye and said I was too young to ever succeed. It wasn't whispered in anger or shouted in a fight. She said it quietly, like it was just a fact of life that somehow hurt worse. It was late summer of 2021 inches Austin, Texas, and the air was hot enough to make the pavement shimmer. I was 35, co-founder of a small AI startup called MindPulse Technologies. I had given that company everything I had: my time, my savings, my sanity. We were supposed to be weeks away from a big investment round that would finally take us out of survival mode. Then, just like that, it all fell apart. The investors pulled out. My co-founder, David Linwood, told me he was working on alternate funding options. What he didn't mention was that those options didn't include me. When I walked into our apartment that night, Melissa was sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open. Bills were scattered around like confetti after a parade. She didn't even look up when she said it. "Ethan, this isn't working. You're chasing dreams, not a life." I dropped my keys on the counter and said, "Dreams are what built this company." She sighed, finally meeting my eyes. "Dreams don't pay the mortgage. You're too young to think you can beat the system. You need to grow up." Too young. Those words cut deeper than she knew. We'd been married 6 years, but it felt like we were living on opposite sides of a window. She saw a man chasing windmills. I saw a man trying to build something that mattered. That night, she packed a suitcase while I stood in the doorway like a ghost. She didn't cry. She just zipped up her bag, walked past me, and said, "I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for." The door closed. The echo stayed. For the first time in my adult life, silence had a weight. I sat on the floor, surrounded by the debris of my ambition: unpaid invoices, empty takeout boxes, a half-dead plant Melissa used to water. The room smelled like coffee and regret. The next morning, my phone buzzed. An email from David. The subject line read, "Transition." I opened it, and my stomach turned cold. The board had voted to dissolve MindPulse. David had agreed to take ownership of key intellectual property for potential continuation of the product. Translation: he took everything. I called him immediately. He didn't answer. I called again. Finally, he picked up. Voice too calm. "David, what the hell is this? You can't just cut me out." "Ethan, you're taking this too personally. It's just business. You've got potential, man, but you're not ready to lead." "Not ready. I built the damn code that runs the whole system." "Yeah, and it's brilliant. But investors want experience. I'm the one they trust. Look, I'll make sure you get something out of it. Maybe a consulting role." I couldn't speak for a second. My hand shook around the phone. "A consulting role on my own company." David seed. Almost annoyed. "Let it go. Ethan, you're young. You'll bounce back." He hung up before I could answer. I stared at the phone screen until it went dark. Then I threw it across the room. It hit the wall, cracked the corner, slid to the floor. The only thing I could hear was my own heartbeat. By evening, the apartment felt smaller. Every shadow looked like her. Every silence sounded like him. I didn't want to stay another minute. I stuffed a few clothes into a bag, grabbed my laptop, and drove. I ended up at my mom's house on the outskirts of Austin. The same, small, single-story home where I'd grown up. When she opened the door, she looked surprised but not shocked. Like she'd been waiting for this day. "Ethan," she said softly, stepping aside. You look tired. I lost everything. Mom. I said. Melissa left. David stole the company. I've got nothing left. She guided me inside, made me sit, and poured coffee like she always did when I was a kid and scraped my knees. You have time, she said. That's not nothing. Time doesn't pay rent. I muttered. She smiled sadly. Neither does pride. That night, I slept in my old room. The posters were gone, replaced by bare walls and the faint smell of cedar. On the desk sat my father's old lamp. He died in 2018. I hadn't sat at that desk since the funeral. I turned the lamp on, just to see if it still worked. The yellow light filled the room. Soft and familiar. There were still faint scratches on the wood where he used to tinker with electronics. I ran my fingers over them like they were braille for a story I'd forgotten how to read. My father, Robert Cole, had been an engineer at Intel. Quiet. Steady. The kind of man who believed in saving, not gambling. He used to tell me patience was the only real investment worth making. I never listened. Now, sitting there at 35, with a failed company and an empty bank account, I wondered if he'd seen this coming. Maybe he'd known that one day his son would have to learn the hard way what patience really meant. I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Melissa walking out the door and David shaking my hand while stealing from me at the same time. By morning, I was awake before sunrise. I made coffee in the kitchen. The same old drip machine from when I was a teenager. Mom walked in. Robe-tied, loosely. Hair still messy from sleep. You should eat something, she said. Not hungry. She poured herself a cup, leaned against the counter. When your father's project got scrapped at Intel, they gave his idea to someone else. He came home quiet for a week. Then he said one thing I'll never forget. I looked up. What? Time has a way of sorting things out. He didn't sue. Didn't fight. Just kept going. 10 years later, that same company called him back to consult on a system built from his design. They paid him more than he ever earned before. I tried to smile, but it didn't reach my eyes. That's not how it works anymore. Mom. Maybe not. But maybe the people haven't changed as much as you think. I didn't answer. I just stared out the window. The Texas sun creeping over the horizon, turning the kitchen gold. The light hit the edge of the old hallway where my father's office door stood half open. I could see the outlines of boxes and papers stacked high. Something about that sight made my chest tighten. Mom followed my gaze. I haven't gone through his things since he passed, she said quietly. You can, if you want. Might keep your mind busy. I nodded, though I didn't mean to. At that point, I wasn't thinking about redemption or revenge. I was just trying to breathe. When she left for her morning walk, I walked down the hallway, hand brushing against the wallpaper. The door creaked when I pushed it open. Inside, the air smelled like dust and faint cologne. My father's tools were still arranged neatly on the shelf. On the desk, a small metal box sat under a layer of dust. I didn't open it. Not yet. I sat in his old chair. The leather cracked but familiar. For a long time, I just sat there, listening to the quiet hum of the house, trying to find some trace of purpose. I whispered to the empty room. I don't know what to do now. Dad. The silence didn't answer. But somehow, sitting there felt like the first step toward something I couldn't see yet. Outside, the sun climbed higher, spilling light through the blinds. The day was just beginning. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel completely lost. When I woke up the next morning, Sunlight was cutting through the blinds like thin lines of gold. My mom had already gone to work in the garden. The house was quiet, except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the wall clock. I sat there for a moment, drinking the leftover coffee from yesterday. Staring at the phone I still hadn't turned on since the night Melissa left. I finally powered it up. The screen lit with notifications I didn't want to see. Missed calls. Emails. One of them had the subject Mind Pulse featured in Tech Vision. Against my better judgment, I opened it. There he was. David Linwood. Standing in front of a camera. Smiling that calm, confident smile he always wore when he was selling something. The headline read, "Rising star of AI David Linwood's Mind Pulse secures multi-million-dollar acquisition." My hand tightened around the phone. Beneath the photo was a quote, "Innovation is about leadership and adaptability. You can't build the future by clinging to the past." He didn't mention me. Not once. I felt something cold rise in my chest. For 10 years, David had been my best friend. We'd met in college at UT Austin. Two kids who thought we could change the world with code. We started MindPulse in his garage during the pandemic, living off cheap pizza and instant coffee. He used to joke that we'd build something so good one day, we'd never have to touch another line of code again. He was the voice, the salesman. I was the builder. He'd walk into rooms full of investors, shake hands, tell stories. I was always the guy in the corner of the meeting. Laptop open, trying to make sure the thing actually worked. I didn't mind. Back then, we were a team. I remember the first time we landed a client. A small logistics company out of Dallas. They wanted to use our AI to predict shipping delays. We worked 3 nights straight to get the demo running. When the system finally went live, and the client wired the first 10 grand, we celebrated like we'd won the lottery. David said, "You see, Ethan, this is it. This is what freedom feels like." I nodded, believing him. We grew fast. Too fast. Within 2 years, we had 6 employees, a small office, and real investors circling. That's when David changed. He started wearing suits to meetings and using phrases like brand position and market trajectory. I still wore hoodies and debugged at 2 in the morning. One afternoon, he called me into his office. "We're bringing in Marcus Hale from Hale Ventures. Big name. Serious capital. I need you to let me handle the paperwork." I remember shrugging. "You're the talker. Go for it." He smiled. "That's what I like about you. Man, you trust me." I did. That was my mistake. The deal closed a month later. David came back from Dallas looking like he'd just won a war. He took me out for drinks at a rooftop bar downtown. The city lights reflected off his glass as he said, "We're about to make real money. Ethan, this is the beginning." He didn't tell me that it was also the end. Weeks passed. I started noticing small changes in the paperwork. My name missing from new investor updates. My title shifting from co-founder to technical consultant in some documents. When I asked, he brushed it off. Just a formatting thing. Man, legal's a nightmare. Then came the Dallas meeting. I drove up there thinking we were finalizing the next funding round. Instead, I walked into a boardroom filled with strangers. David sat at the head of the table. The projector screen showed a new company name. Linwood Technologies. The same logo. The same code. Just my name erased. I felt my throat tighten. What the hell is this? David leaned back in his chair. Rebranding. Investors want a single point of leadership. It's cleaner this way. You mean without me? He gave that smooth half smile I'd seen 100 times. Come on. Ethan, don't make it personal. You're brilliant at what you do. But you're not built for the front end of this game. Let me take it from here. You'll get a payout. Maybe a consultant role. I laughed. I actually laughed, though it came out more like a choke. A consultant. On the company I built, on the code I wrote. He said. Annoyed. Don't do this. We both know how this works. You're the talent. I'm the operator. Investors back people who know how to scale. I wanted to punch him. I wanted to grab the laptop off the table and show every person in that room who really built MindPulse. But I didn't. I just stood there, feeling my face heat and my voice fade. You stole from me, I said quietly. He shook his head. I capitalized. You can't steal potential. Ethan, you either use it or lose it. I walked out. Nobody stopped me. That drive back to Austin felt endless. The radio was off. The highway empty. The hum of the engine, the only sound. Every mile felt like another year I'd wasted trusting him. By the time I pulled into my mom's driveway, my hands were still shaking. She was on the porch, trimming her roses. She looked up, saw my face, and put the shears down. It didn't go well. I sat on the steps. He took everything. Mom, the company, the code, even the damn name. She sat beside me, quiet for a moment. Then she said, when your father worked at Intel, one of his designs got credited to his boss. He didn't fight it. I asked him why once. What did he say? He said, because time has a way of sorting things out. Oh. I let out a bitter laugh. That's not how the world works anymore. She looked at me with those calm, steady eyes that used to scare me when I was a kid. Maybe not. Or maybe you just haven't given it enough time yet. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of soil and coffee from the kitchen. I didn't answer her. I just stared out across the yard, trying to quiet the storm inside my chest. That night, I sat at my father's old desk again. The lamp still flickered when I turned it on. I scrolled through my old emails. Old code. Old memories. There was a folder on my hard drive labeled MindPulse Archive. I opened it. Every line of code was still there. The system that David had stolen was mine in every way that mattered. Even if the world didn't see it. I wanted to delete it all. But I didn't. I just sat there, staring at the blinking cursor on the screen, feeling like it was daring me to start again. My mom knocked softly on the door. You should get some sleep. I can't, I said. Every time I close my eyes, I see him. Then open them, she said gently. Keep them open long enough, and you'll see what he can't. After she left, I leaned back in the chair and looked around the room. The shadows stretched across the floor. My father's tool chest sat in the corner. I untouched. On top of it was a stack of folders. One of them marked personal. I didn't open it. Not yet. I wasn't ready to think about him. Or the past. Or the lessons I never learned. I just sat there, listening to the sound of the ceiling fan, feeling the ache of betrayal settle into something colder, something sharper. That was the night I stopped feeling sorry for myself. That was the night I decided that if time was going to sort things out, I'd be there to watch it happen. The next few weeks moved like a blur I couldn't escape. Days blended together into the same gray routine. I would wake up before sunrise, drink coffee that tasted like burnt paper, and stare at my laptop until the words on the screen meant nothing. I kept telling myself I'd start something new, maybe freelance or consult, but the motivation never came. By mid-November, the money in my checking account was almost gone. I sold my old watch, canceled every subscription, and stopped answering texts from friends who still thought I was doing fine. I wasn't. I was 35 and felt twice that age. Mom didn't push. She just kept doing small things, like making breakfast or leaving folded laundry by my door. One afternoon, she asked me to help fix her laptop. It had been running slow for months. I followed her into the small study, where the air smelled like dust and lemon polish. While she went to check on something in the kitchen, I knelt by the desk to unplug the power cord. That's when I saw it. A thick layer of dust coated the corner drawer. I pulled it open, expecting old manuals or papers. Instead, a small yellow envelope sat wedged beneath a stack of tax folders. On the front, written in my father's neat block letters, were the words, First Western Bank, Investment Account, Robert Cole. For a second, I thought it was some old insurance paperwork. But the words investment account stood out. My father had never talked about investments. He'd been the kind of man who clipped coupons, fixed his own car, and believed in cash, not credit. When Mom came back, I held it up. What's this? She looked at it for a long moment before answering. Your father's old account. I think it's from before you went to college. I never touched it. Is it still active? She shrugged. I doubt it. He didn't have much money to begin with. I turned the envelope over in my hands. It felt heavier than paper should. Can I check? Of course, she said softly. Maybe it'll give you something to think about besides that company. That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after she'd gone to bed. The envelope lay open in front of me. Inside was an old passbook, the kind banks used to print before everything went digital. The pages were yellowed and smelled faintly of metal and dust. The first line read, August 2000. Deposit $20. Lien. There were more entries. Every single month. $20. Then another. And another. The last line was from 2018. The year he died. I flipped through the pages slowly, my mind struggling to make sense of it. $20 a month wasn't much. But he'd never skipped a single payment. There was also a small slip of paper tucked between the pages, with a note in my mother's handwriting, Ask First Western if this is still valid. I sat there, staring at it, until the clock hit midnight. Part of me thought it was pointless. Maybe the bank didn't even exist anymore. But another part of me couldn't let it go. My father had been methodical about everything he did. If he kept this for 18 years, there was a reason. The next morning, I told Mom I was heading into town. She raised an eyebrow. Bank. Yeah, I said, just curious. The First Western branch was downtown. In one of those new buildings, with glass walls and brushed steel, everything. Inside. Everything smelled like air conditioning and new carpet. I stood in line, feeling out of place in my old jeans and faded jacket. When I reached the counter, a young teller with perfect makeup and a smile that didn't reach her eyes greeted me. How can I help you today? I handed her the passbook. I found this in my father's things. He passed away a few years ago. I was wondering if the account still exists. She blinked, looking at the booklet like it was a relic from another century. Wow. This is vintage. I've never seen one of these. Yeah, I figured. Let me check with my manager, she said, picking it up carefully as if it might crumble. A few minutes later, a woman in her 40s came out of the back office. Her badge read Patricia Holman, branch manager. She smiled warmly and gestured for me to follow her. Mr. Cole. I'm Patricia. Let's take a look in the system. Her office was small, with framed certificates on the wall and a faint smell of coffee. She typed for a while on an old-looking terminal. The kind, with green text, on a black background. Then she stopped. Her brows furrowed slightly. This is unusual. My pulse quickened. Unusual how? She turned the monitor slightly. The account's still active. It was never closed. But there's something else. It's linked to an automatic investment program. I don't understand. What does that mean? She leaned closer. Instead of just sitting in savings, the deposits were automatically used to purchase fractional shares of a company. Do you know what company your father invested in? I shook my head. No idea. He never mentioned investing in anything. Patricia typed again, then smiled, faintly. It looks like Amazon. He started in August 2000. That was before their stock really took off. My stomach dropped. Amazon-like. Amazon. Amazon. Yes. The system shows consistent monthly purchases of fractional shares until 2018. After that, the deposits stopped. But the holdings remained untouched. She typed a few more commands, then printed a sheet of paper. This is the current balance. She handed it to me. My eyes scanned the numbers. But they didn't make sense at first. I blinked and read again. $2,485,312.19. I stared at it for so long that Patricia asked, Mr. Cole, are you all right? I laughed. But it came out strangled. That can't be real. My dad worked at Intel. He wasn't rich. She smiled gently. He didn't have to be. He just had patience. He invested $20 a month for 18 years. Time did the rest. Something inside me cracked open. Patricia opened a drawer and pulled out a sealed envelope. There's one more thing. Our records show a letter stored with this account. Marked to Ethan Cole. Would you like to take it? I nodded. Unable to speak. She handed it to me carefully. It was yellowed around the edges. My name, written in my father's handwriting. I held it like it might disappear if I breathed too hard. Outside. The Texas sun was blinding. I sat in my car in the parking lot, staring at that envelope. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Son, if you're reading this, then life's knocked you down. I started this account so that one day, if the world tried to break you, you'd remember that value doesn't disappear when people stop seeing it. Good things grow slowly. Be patient. Your mother and I believe in you. Even when you don't. Love. Dad. I read it again. And again. Then I pressed the paper to my chest. And for the first time in years, I cried. The sound of it surprised me. I wasn't crying from sadness exactly. It was something else. Relief, maybe. Or gratitude. Or the realization that my father had believed in me long before I had earned it. When I finally started the car, I didn't know what I was supposed to do next. But I knew this patience wasn't weakness. It was power waiting for its moment. And maybe that moment had just begun. Driving home from the bank, I kept glancing at the passenger seat like the letter might vanish if I didn't keep it in sight. The sunlight caught the edge of the paper. And for a second I could almost see my dad sitting beside me, calm as ever. Like he used to be when I was a kid riding shotgun in his old Ford. The words from his letter ran through my mind again and again. Good things grow slowly. Be patient. When I pulled into the driveway, Mom was trimming the hedges. She looked up, shielding her eyes from the sun. So, did you find anything? I stepped out of the car, still clutching the envelope. Yeah. Mom, I found everything. Inside. I spread the documents across the kitchen table. The printout from the bank looked like something out of a dream. Mom adjusted her glasses. Squinting. 2.4 million. Her hand went to her chest. He never said a word. I sat down. rubbing the back of my neck. He must have wanted it to stay quiet. It was like a safety net for when life finally caught up to me. She stared at the numbers for a long time, then smiled through tears. He always believed in you, Ethan. Even when you didn't make it easy. I didn't have a reply. I just looked at the letter again. My father's words were simple, but every line hit deeper the more I read them. He had worked 40 hours a week, sometimes more, and still found $20 every month to put aside. Not for himself. For me. The next morning, I went back to the bank to meet Patricia again. She'd called earlier saying there were a few formalities to handle. Her office felt smaller this time, probably because my mind was spinning. She greeted me with that same calm professionalism. Mr. Cole. First of all, I want to say this is one of the most remarkable accounts I've ever seen. Your father was an incredible planner. I smiled faintly. Yeah, he was. She handed me a folder. These are the ownership transfer forms. Once we verify your identification, the account will be legally under your name. We'll also need your signature for the investment side. The assets are still held in Amazon stock. Still, I asked. He never sold any of it. She shook her head. Not a single share. That's what makes this so extraordinary. Most people would have cashed out years ago. But he kept buying. Even through recessions and market crashes. I thought about that on the drive home. Every market dip. Every financial panic. And he just kept going. Steady hands. No panic. No greed. Just faith that the right things take time. When I got home, Mom had made lunch. Grilled cheese. Just like she used to make when I was 10. We ate in silence until she said, "What are you going to do now?" I put the sandwich down. I don't know. I could pay off everything. Buy a house. Start over. She nodded slowly. Or, you could figure out why your father believed you'd need this someday. That question stayed with me all afternoon. By sunset, I found myself in Dad's office again, going through his old boxes. Most of it was technical manuals, blueprints, and small projects he'd tinkered with. But at the bottom of one box was a photo I hadn't seen in years. It was me and him at a science fair, standing beside a clunky robot we'd built together. He was smiling like I'd just built the space shuttle. On the back, in his handwriting, it said, "Patience builds everything worth having." That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about patience. About the years I'd spent chasing speed. Startups. Quick exits. Fast money. That was the world David lived in. That was what had burned me. My dad had played the long game his entire life. And somehow he'd won without ever telling anyone. The next week was a blur of paperwork and meetings. Patricia helped finalize the transfer. And for the first time, I saw the actual portfolio. Decades of tiny deposits had turned into something massive. A few clicks on a computer screen, and suddenly I had more money than I'd ever imagined. But I didn't feel rich. I felt humbled. One evening, Mom came into the living room holding 2 mugs of coffee. "You've been quiet," she said. "I'm trying to figure out what this means." I said, "What I'm supposed to do with it." She smiled. "Maybe the same thing he did. Build something that lasts." I nodded, staring at the mug in my hands. I thought about all the people who'd called me foolish. Too young. Naive. Maybe I had been. But maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. A few days later, I met Patricia again to go over the investment options. She handed me another paper. "You can cash out any time. But there's no rush. It's still earning dividends. If you want, we can set up a smaller account to use for expenses." I hesitated. Can I keep it as it is? Let it keep growing? She smiled. That's what your father would have done. Driving back home, I rolled down the windows and let the warm Texas wind hit my face. The air smelled like rain and asphalt, for the first time in months. Maybe years. I felt calm. That night, I sat at Dad's desk again. The letter lay open beside the lamp. I read it one more time, my fingers tracing the faded ink. He must have written it in 2018. Right before the surgery he never came back from. I pictured him sitting right where I was, writing those words carefully, knowing they'd reach me someday. I whispered to the empty room. You were right. Dad, you always were. The next morning, I opened my laptop and started typing. Not code this time. A plan. I wasn't going to let this money sit there like a monument. I was going to make it mean something. I called my old contact from UT Austin, a professor who ran a community tech program. Hey, Professor Adams, it's Ethan Cole. There was a pause. Ethan, I haven't heard from you in years. You all right? Getting there. I said, listen, I've got an idea. What if we built a small program to teach coding to people who got laid off? Or who never got the chance to learn? He sounded surprised but interested. That's ambitious. You sure you're ready for something like that? I looked at the letter on my desk. Yeah, I think I am. We talked for an hour, making rough plans. When I hung up, Mom was standing in the doorway, smiling. Your father would love that, she said. I hope so, I replied. That night, I sat outside on the porch. The cicadas were loud, the air thick with humidity. I stared up at the sky, a dark sheet of stars, and thought about how many nights Dad must have sat out here too, wondering if any of his efforts mattered. Maybe they didn't back then, but they did now. Somewhere inside, something shifted. The anger I'd carried for months started to fade. What replaced it wasn't joy, exactly, but purpose. Quiet, steady, patient purpose. When I went to bed that night, I left the letter open on my desk. The last line caught the light from the lamp. Good things grow slowly. I closed my eyes and, for the first time in a long while, slept without the weight of failure pressing on my chest. When I woke the next morning, the air felt lighter somehow, like something inside me had finally settled. I made coffee, stepped outside, and watched the sky turn from gray to blue. It had been months since I'd felt that simple peace, the kind that didn't need a reason. But peace doesn't pay the bills, and purpose doesn't come without work. By the end of that week, I knew I needed help to handle what came next. The bank account was now officially in my name, but with it came tax questions, legal paperwork, and the nagging thought that David was still out there, living off the code I'd written. I made an appointment with a lawyer named Rachel Alvarez. She came highly recommended by Patricia, the bank manager. Rachel's office was in downtown Austin, tucked between a coffee shop and a law firm twice her size. When I walked in, she was sitting at her desk, surrounded by stacks of files and a half-eaten sandwich. She stood to shake my hand. Ethan Cole. Right, Patricia told me about your father's account. That's one hell of a story. Yeah, I said, sitting down. Feels like it belongs to someone else. She smiled. Professional but warm. Let's make sure it stays yours. I'll handle the estate transition paperwork. But Patricia also mentioned you've got another issue. Something about intellectual property. I nodded. My former business partner stole our company. Took my code. The clients. Everything. She leaned back in her chair. Mind pulse. Correct. I read about it. Linwood Technologies now. Yeah, I said. That's him. Rachel's tone shifted slightly. Did you keep records, emails, contracts, source files? All of it. I said. Every line of code. Every message. Her eyes narrowed. Impressed. That's good. If he used your code without proper transfer agreements, we might have a case. But it won't be easy. I'm not looking for revenge, I said, though the words didn't sound convincing even to me. I just want my name back. Rachel nodded. That's a start. Send me everything you have. I'll take a look. When I left her office, I sat in my car for a long time. For the first time since losing everything, I felt like maybe I wasn't powerless. That evening, I told Mom about the meeting. She nodded thoughtfully as she poured tea. Your father would have liked her. Sharp woman. I smiled. She doesn't waste words. Neither did he. Mom said, maybe that's why you two get along. Over the next few days, I gathered every scrap of digital evidence I could find. Emails, code commits, even old screenshots of Slack conversations. Rachel called one afternoon to tell me she was filing a preliminary motion to preserve digital records from Linwood Technologies. It'll take time, she said. But David's going to have to answer for what he did. Those words lit something in me I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Yes. But also drive. I started thinking again. Sketching ideas. Coding small prototypes. Not for investors or profit. For myself? That's when the idea for the center came to me. Not a company. A program. A place where people who'd been burned by layoffs or bad luck could learn to code. Rebuild. And maybe find what I'd lost direction. I called it the Robert Initiative. It felt right. Mom helped me clear out the old garage. The same one where Dad and I had once built that science fair robot. I scrubbed the oil stains from the floor while she painted the walls a pale gray. It wasn't fancy, but it was enough. The first person I hired was a guy named Daniel Hayes, 29, with a scruffy beard and a resume full of short-term jobs. He came in for an interview wearing a wrinkled shirt and an expression that looked equal parts hope and exhaustion. Tell me about yourself, I said. He shrugged. Got laid off last year. Worked tech support. Tried to freelance, but couldn't get clients. Guess I'm not good at selling myself. Good, I said. I'm not looking for a salesman. He frowned. What are you looking for? Someone who remembers what it's like to start from nothing. He smiled. Small, but real. Then I'm your guy. By February, the garage was a workspace again. Desks. Laptops. Whiteboards. The hum of quiet focus replaced the silence that used to haunt the place. Every night, Daniel and I stayed late, building lesson plans and testing software. Sometimes we ordered cheap tacos from the food truck down the street and talked about life. He told me about his dad, a truck driver who'd never believed in computers. I told him about mine, a man who believed in everything built slowly. One night, after locking up, Daniel said, You know, if your dad hadn't saved that money, you'd never be doing this. I looked at him. Maybe. Or maybe this was always part of it. He invested in time. I'm just spending it. A few weeks later, Rachel called. Her voice sounded lighter than usual. Ethan, you might want to sit down. I am sitting. Good. Because the SEC just opened an investigation into Linwood Technologies. They found irregularities in the acquisition deal. It's early. But your case just got a lot stronger. I gripped the phone tighter. You're serious. Dead serious. David's been moving money through shell accounts. If that's proven, he's in deep trouble. After I hung up, I sat in silence. The room was dim except for the glow of my laptop screen. For the first time, I didn't feel angry at David, just sad. He'd traded loyalty for greed, friendship for validation, and now the clock was catching up to him. That night, Mom found me outside on the porch, staring at the stars. "You look like your father used to when he was solving a problem," she said. "I'm not sure I solved anything," I said, "but maybe I'm learning patience after all." She smiled, the lines at the corners of her eyes deepening. "Took you long enough." I laughed softly, the kind that comes from somewhere tired but full. The wind carried the smell of cut grass and spring rain. Inside, my phone buzzed again. A text from Rachel. "I'll keep you updated." This could change everything. I looked back up at the sky, thinking of my dad. He'd once told me that time reveals truth. Just slower than we like. It was revealing now. By the end of that month, the Robert Initiative had its first group of students. 8 people. All older than me. All carrying their own version of failure. A single mother trying to re-enter the job market. A factory worker learning code for the first time. Daniel led the class while I watched from the back. Heart full. When the lesson ended, he turned to me. "You're smiling." "Boss, that's new." "Feels weird," I said. "Like maybe I'm finally doing something that matters." He grinned. "Guess your dad knew what he was doing." I nodded. Yeah, he really did. That night, as I locked the door, my phone lit up again. Another message from Rachel. This one just said, "Call me first thing tomorrow. You'll want to hear this." I stood there for a moment, the glow of the phone lighting my hand, the cool night air against my face. Something was shifting again. Another turn I hadn't seen coming. For the first time, I didn't feel afraid of what it might bring. When I called Rachel the next morning, her voice carried a hint of excitement that I hadn't heard before. She said she had good news and bad news, and asked which I wanted first. I told her to start with the bad. David's lawyer filed a motion to delay the proceedings. She said, "They're trying to buy time. But the good news is the SEC case is moving faster than expected. The evidence they've uncovered is bad for him. Ethan. Really bad." I leaned back in my chair. Define bad. He falsified financial statements during the acquisition. It's fraud. Plain and simple. If it sticks, he won't just lose the company. He could lose everything. For a moment, I didn't say anything. I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and pity. 2 emotions that didn't belong together but somehow lived side by side in my chest. Rachel continued. "The press is starting to pick up on it. Don't be surprised if someone reaches out for a comment. You'll want to stay quiet until the investigation wraps." "Got it," I said. "Thanks for keeping me posted." After the call, I sat at my desk, staring at the old photo of my dad taped to the lamp. He was holding a soldering iron, his eyes focused on some tiny circuit. Calm and unshakable. I wondered what he'd think of all this. Justice, or something close to it. Finally happening. By the end of the week, the story hit the local papers. Linwood Technologies under federal investigation. The headlines sat there on my laptop screen like a scar I couldn't stop touching. The article mentioned my name briefly, describing me as the former co-founder of MindPulse, now operating a non-profit tech education center in Austin. It was strange seeing my name tied to something positive again. 2 days later, I got a call from a journalist named Amanda Fields. She said she was doing a feature on the case and wanted to include the human side of it. I told her I wasn't interested in talking about David or the money. But she said the story wasn't about him. It was about what people do after everything falls apart. Her tone was different from other reporters I dealt with in the past. Honest. Respectful. So, I agreed to meet. We sat at a small coffee shop downtown. She had a notebook but barely wrote anything. Mostly just listened. I told her about the early days. The garage startup. The nights spent debugging while David pitched to investors. Then I told her about my dad's letter. The $20 a month. The patience that built an empire no one saw coming. When I finished, she said softly, "That's incredible. You know, not many people your age would have handled it the way you did." I laughed. I didn't handle it well. I just ran out of ways to handle it wrong. She smiled. Still, there's something poetic about it. Your father's patience, saving you from a world built on speed. I shrugged. He was the kind of man who fixed things before they broke. I didn't understand that until I broke. A week later, her article went live on TechVision's site under the title, "The Coder Who Learned Patience." It wasn't sensational or flashy. It was simple, honest, and full of my dad's words. I didn't expect the response. My inbox flooded with messages from people I'd never met. Former tech workers. Single parents. College kids drowning in student debt. They all said the same thing, that the story made them feel seen. Like failure wasn't the end of the road. The next evening, while I was cleaning up after class at the Robert Initiative, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it. But something made me answer. "Ethan." A familiar voice said, "It's been a while." "Melissa." For a second, I couldn't find words. I just stood there, holding the phone, staring at the half-empty coffee cup on my desk. "I saw the article," she said. "I read it twice. I figured you might." Silence stretched between us, long and fragile. Then she said, "I didn't understand back then what you were trying to do. I thought you were chasing something you'd never catch." "You weren't wrong," I said quietly. "I just needed to stop chasing the wrong thing." Her voice cracked slightly. "You sound different. Happier." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe I just stopped needing to prove anything." There was another pause. Then she said, "I'm proud of you, Ethan." I wanted to say thank you, but the words wouldn't come. She didn't ask to see me, and I didn't offer. When the call ended, I sat there for a long time, listening to the hum of the old ceiling fan. Later that night, Daniel walked in with 2 beers. "Big day." "Huh, the internet loves you now." "Yeah," I said, taking one. "Never thought patience would trend online." He laughed. "Guess your dad's philosophy finally went viral." I smiled. It felt good to laugh, even for a moment. Over the next few weeks, the Robert Initiative grew faster than I expected. More people wanted to volunteer. Local companies started donating equipment, and a few tech recruiters reached out about hiring our students. Every night, I went home exhausted but satisfied. It wasn't fame or fortune, but it was purpose. Real, tangible purpose. Then, one morning, Patricia from the bank called. "I thought you might want an update," she said. "Your father's account is still active, and with recent gains, it's grown again. The balance now sits at roughly 2.6 million. I laughed softly. "He's still teaching me lessons from the grave." Patricia chuckled. "He invested with faith, not luck. That kind of discipline is rare." After the call, I sat by the window watching the afternoon light stretch across the yard. I thought about everything that had happened. Melissa's words, the article, the program, David's downfall. It all felt like a full circle, but one that hadn't quite closed yet. That night, I told Mom about the new growth in the account. She smiled, eyes twinkling behind her glasses. "Don't touch it," she said. "Let it keep doing what it was meant to do." I wasn't planning to. I said, "It's not mine. It's his legacy." She reached over and squeezed my hand. "No, Ethan, it's yours now. He built it for you to carry forward. Just don't forget why." I nodded. But I already knew. It wasn't about money. It never had been. As I lay in bed that night, I thought about something my father once told me when I was 10. The night before my first science fair, he'd said, "Don't build things to win. Build them to last." I hadn't thought about that in years. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees. The same steady rhythm that used to lull me to sleep as a kid. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't restless. I wasn't waiting for something to happen. I closed my eyes, and for a moment, I could almost hear his voice again, calm and steady as ever, telling me to keep going. The morning the hearing began, Austin was covered in fog so thick I could barely see the courthouse steps. I parked a few blocks away and sat in the car for a minute, letting the engine idle, my hands gripping the steering wheel. It felt like every decision, every sleepless night since David betrayed me, had led to this moment. When I finally walked inside, the air smelled like old paper and disinfectant. The marble floors echoed with every footstep. Rachel met me near the entrance, dressed in a dark suit, her usual calm expression slightly sharper than normal. She handed me a cup of coffee. "You ready?" she asked. "As I'll ever be," I said. She gave a quick nod. "He's here." I turned my head and saw David across the hallway, talking to his lawyer. He looked thinner, his hair shorter, and the confident gleam he used to carry like armor was gone. When his eyes met mine, there was a flicker of something, shame maybe, or anger, but he looked away first. The hearing wasn't about prison or punishment yet. It was about ownership, about proving who really created the foundation of MindPulse. Rachel explained that if we won, it would not only restore my rights to the code, but also strip him of the protection he'd built through the acquisition. Inside the courtroom, the judge, an older woman with silver hair and glasses perched low on her nose, kept things moving quickly. Rachel's voice was calm but firm as she presented our evidence original timestamps on code repositories, archived emails showing my authorship, and early contracts naming me as co-founder. David's lawyer tried to argue that my role was technical assistance, that I had agreed to relinquish intellectual rights when the company restructured. But Rachel was ready for that. She pulled up a projection of one of our first prototype files. My initials were embedded in the source header, along with a note I'd written 10 years ago. I'd forgotten it until now. It read, "Do not deploy until tested. EC." Rachel turned to the judge. "Every version of this system, including the current one used by Linwood Technologies, contains these same lines. Mr. Cole's authorship is undeniable." For a moment, the courtroom was silent except for the hum of the projector. David stared straight ahead, jaw tight. Then it was my turn to speak. Rachel gave me a small nod. "Take your time," she whispered. I stood, walked to the front, and faced the judge. My voice felt small at first but grew steadier with each word. I started MindPulse with David Linwood because I believed in what we were building. I believed that technology could make life easier, not colder. We worked side by side for years. But when the company grew, So did the gap between us. He wanted investors. I wanted integrity. He won the argument. I lost my name. I paused, meeting David's eyes. All I want now is recognition for what I created. Not money. Not fame. Just the truth. The judge nodded and motioned for me to sit. David's lawyer called him to the stand next. He adjusted his tie and cleared his throat, his confidence returning like a reflex. He began by talking about vision and leadership, about how he took risks and carried the company through hard times. Then Rachel approached for cross-examination. "Mr. Linwood," she said evenly, "can you explain why? In 2021, your financial reports listed MindPulse's core code as proprietary under your name when the repository logs show it originated from Ethan Cole's private server." David hesitated. It was merged data. The company's intellectual property belonged to the entity, not the individual. Rachel's tone stayed polite but sharp. "Except the entity didn't exist when that code was written. Isn't that right?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Technically, yes. But we were partners. It was mutual." "Was it also mutual?" she said, stepping closer. "When you filed to dissolve MindPulse without notifying Mr. Cole." His jaw tightened. "It was a business decision." She nodded slowly. "A business decision that transferred all assets to Linwood Technologies. An entity created 3 days later with you as the sole owner." The judge looked up from her notes. "Is that accurate?" "Mr. Linwood." David swallowed hard. "It's complicated." Rachel turned toward the bench. "It doesn't need to be complicated. Your Honor, it needs to be honest." By the time the hearing recessed for lunch, the weight in the room was thick enough to choke on. I stepped outside. The sunlight sharp after hours under fluorescent lights. Rachel followed me out, loosening her collar. "You did well," she said. "You stayed grounded. That matters more than you think." I nodded, staring at the courthouse steps. "You think we'll win?" She smiled faintly. "I think the truth's on our side. That's usually enough." When the session resumed, the judge announced that she would deliver a preliminary ruling within 2 weeks. 2 weeks. After all those years of silence, it would come down to 14 more days. As we left the building, a few reporters waited outside. Cameras pointed toward us. Amanda Fields, the journalist from TechVision, stood among them. She raised her hand slightly when she saw me. "Ethan, any comment on how it feels facing your former partner in court?" I stopped for a second, thinking carefully. Then I said, "It feels like building something worth keeping. Sometimes you just have to rebuild it yourself." That night, back home, Mom was waiting on the porch. The sky was painted in gold and purple as the sun dipped below the trees. "How did it go?" she asked. I sat beside her, exhaling. "Better than I expected. Worse than I hoped." She smiled softly. "That's usually how progress feels." We sat in silence for a while. The crickets had just started singing. Then she said, "Your father would have been proud today." I stared out at the yard, the one Dad used to mow every Sunday, and felt something loosen in my chest. I hope so. Inside, the house was quiet. On my desk, the letter from him still lay under the glass top, edges curled from age. I read it one more time before turning off the light. "Good things grow slowly." That night, I dreamed of him standing in his workshop, the smell of solder and coffee thick in the air. He turned to me, smiling, and said the same thing he always used to when a project finally worked. "See, it just needed time." When I woke, I didn't feel angry anymore. Just ready. Ready for whatever came next. 2 weeks passed slower than I thought time could move. Every morning I woke up before the alarm. I checked my phone and found nothing. No message from Rachel. No news from the court. The waiting ate at me more than the fight itself ever had. To keep from going crazy, I buried myself in work. The Robert Initiative was running smoother now. Daniel had taken over the advanced class, and the students were starting to help each other instead of leaning on me for every question. Watching that happen felt like witnessing a small miracle. One night, after class ended, Daniel and I sat outside the garage with a couple of cold beers. The Texas night was heavy with the sound of crickets. "You ever think about what happens if you win?" he asked suddenly. I stared at the gravel. "I'm trying not to." He nodded. "You know, it's funny. I used to think success was about the paycheck. Then I met you. Now I think it's about sleeping at night." I smiled. "I'll drink to that." We clinked bottles. For a moment, the world felt calm. Then, my phone buzzed. Rachel's name flashed on the screen. My chest tightened as I answered. Her voice was steady but warm. "Ethan, we got the ruling." I stood up, pacing the edge of the driveway. "And? You won," she said. "The judge ruled in your favor. Full recognition of intellectual property and co-founder status. Linwood Technologies has to cease use of the code immediately. You're officially the registered creator of MindPulse." For a second, I couldn't speak. The words didn't sound real. Daniel was watching me with wide eyes, trying to read my expression. "Rachel, are you serious?" "Completely. The decision's public record as of an hour ago. David's counsel already filed for settlement negotiations. They want to avoid criminal proceedings." I felt my knees go weak, so I sat down on the porch step. "Thank you," I whispered. Rachel's tone softened. "You earned this. Ethan, I'll handle the next steps. But tonight, maybe just breathe for the first time in a long while." When I hung up, Daniel leaned forward. "Well," I grinned for the first time in months. "We won." He let out a loud whoop that startled a few birds out of a nearby tree. Then he laughed and clapped me on the back. "Damn. Man. About time the good guy gets something back." I didn't celebrate. Not really. I just sat there, listening to the sound of the night, letting it sink in. The next morning, the story broke across every major tech site. Court rules against Linwood Technologies. Co-founder Ethan Cole wins intellectual property case. My inbox exploded again. Former colleagues. Of journalists. Even a few investors I hadn't spoken to in years sent congratulations. I didn't reply to any of them. By noon, Rachel called again. "They're offering a settlement," she said. 7 figures. Confidential agreement. No admission of wrongdoing. I hesitated. "Do we take it?" "That's up to you. It's fair compensation for what was stolen. You'd have legal ownership of the code regardless." I rubbed my temple. He doesn't deserve to walk away clean. Rachel sighed. "Maybe not. But walking away doesn't always mean freedom. Let the record show who won. That's what matters." After we hung up, I drove out of town. I didn't have a destination. Just a need to move. The highway stretched ahead. Endless and empty. Somewhere near Lake Travis. I pulled over and sat by the water. The sun hung low, turning the lake gold. I thought about David. About all the years we'd worked side by side. The long nights. The big dreams. The trust that turned to rot. I didn't hate him anymore. I just felt sorry for him. Somewhere along the way, He'd confused ambition with worth. I knew now those two things weren't the same. When I got home, Mom was on the porch waiting again. She didn't need to ask. The look on her face told me she already knew. "You won," she said softly. "Yeah." She smiled, tears welling in her eyes. "Your father would have said it took you long enough." I laughed. And for once it didn't sound hollow. He'd be right. She took my hand and squeezed it. "So what now?" I looked out over the yard. The same one Dad used to mow with perfect straight lines. "I'm not sure. But I know what I'm not going to do. I'm not selling out again." That night, I got another call. This one from an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it. But curiosity won. "Ethan," the voice said quietly. "It's David." I froze. "Why are you calling me?" "I just wanted to say congratulations. You got what you wanted." "That's not what I wanted," I said. "I wanted honesty. That's all." He sighed. And for the first time, I heard something human in his voice. "You think I didn't believe in what we built? I did. I just thought I could control it better without you." "You couldn't," I said simply. There was a long silence. Then he said, "They're shutting the company down next month. Everything's gone. I guess this is karma." I didn't respond. "I hope you make something better out of it," he said finally. "Goodbye." "Ethan." The line went dead. I sat there for a long time, staring at the dark window across the room, my reflection faintly visible in the glass. I thought about how easy it is to lose yourself when you chase the wrong kind of success. The next morning, I met Rachel at her office to sign the final papers. She shook my hand, her eyes tired but proud. "This is the clean ending. Ethan, not everyone gets one." "Maybe it's not the ending," I said. "Maybe it's just the right chapter closing." She smiled. "Then write the next one carefully." When I walked out of her office, the city felt different, brighter somehow. The noise of traffic didn't bother me like it used to. People passed by talking on phones, rushing to meetings, chasing things I'd spent years chasing myself. But for once, I didn't feel behind them. I felt free. That evening, I stopped by the Robert Initiative. Class was wrapping up. Daniel waved from across the room, his voice echoing. "Hey, boss." The new students nailed their first project. I watched them laugh and pack up their laptops. Proud and tired and hopeful. I thought of my dad again, of the letter that had started all of this. Good things grow slowly. He'd been right. It took me half a lifetime to understand what he meant. But sitting there, surrounded by the quiet hum of progress built on patience, I finally did. Outside, the night air was cool. The world kept moving. But for the first time in years, I wasn't chasing it. I was part of it. And somewhere, deep down, I knew my father would have smiled at that. The months that followed felt different from anything I'd ever lived through. The noise of ambition was gone, replaced by something quieter, steadier. The Robert Initiative grew little by little. Companies started reaching out to hire our students. Local schools asked if we could run weekend programs. I wasn't chasing headlines anymore. But somehow the story kept spreading. One afternoon, Amanda Fields called again. She wanted to do a follow-up feature. This time not about revenge or redemption, but about what came after. I told her I'd think about it. The truth was, I didn't feel like a headline anymore. I just wanted to build something that lasted, the way my father had. By spring, the garage was too small. We moved the program into an old warehouse near downtown Austin. A space with tall windows and brick walls that smelled faintly of machine oil and possibility. Volunteers helped repaint and install new desks. On the first day in the new space, I hung my father's photo above the front door. His eyes looked calm, proud, the way I remembered. That evening, Mom came to see it. She stood in the doorway, her hand resting on my arm. "He'd love this," she said softly. "I hope so," I said. She smiled. "He doesn't have to see it to know." That night, we hosted an open house. Students brought their families. The room buzzed with laughter and nervous excitement. Daniel stood up and gave a short speech about patience, about second chances, about how failure wasn't the end. When he finished, everyone clapped. I stayed quiet, watching from the back, feeling the weight of the moment. Afterward, I went outside for some air. The sky was clear, the stars sharp. Amanda was there with her camera crew packing up equipment. She waved. "You should have spoken. Ethan, people need to hear from you." I smiled. "They've heard enough from me. It's their turn now." She studied me for a moment, then said, "You're not the same guy I interviewed last year." "I hope not," I said. A few weeks later, Rachel called with the final update. The settlement had cleared. The funds were transferred. And the case was officially closed. David had sold what was left of Linwood Technologies to pay off legal debts. He'd left Austin, maybe for good. Rachel sounded almost sentimental when she said, "You really came full circle, Ethan." I thanked her and told her she'd done more than she knew. When I hung up, I sat at my desk for a long time, staring at the letter still framed beside my computer. The edges had yellowed a little, but the words were still clear. Good things grow slowly. Later that evening, Daniel stopped by with takeout. "End of an era." "Huh," he said, dropping the bags on the counter. "More like the start of one." I said. We ate in silence for a while. The easy kind that doesn't need filling. When he left, I walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, people were still rushing, still chasing the next big thing. I used to be one of them. Now I understood that the best things don't need to be chased. They just need to be built. Summer came, and with it, the first graduation ceremony for our students. 27 people stood in line holding certificates, their faces glowing with pride. Some of them had jobs waiting. Others were planning to teach. I gave a short speech, just a few sentences. I told them to stay patient, to keep learning, to remember that time rewards those who don't give up. They clapped, cheered, and laughed. For once, I didn't feel like an outsider in my own story. After the ceremony, a young man approached me, maybe 25, nervous but smiling. "Mr. Cole, my dad was one of your first students. He got hired at a software firm last month. He said you changed his life." I shook his hand and said, "Tell him he did the hard part." That night, when the building was empty, I walked through the rows of desks. The faint hum of computers filled the air. I stopped by the front door and looked up at my father's picture. "You were right," I said quietly. "It just needed time." The next morning, I visited the small cemetery where he was buried. The grass was high, and the Texas wind was warm. I set a folded copy of Amanda's latest article by his headstone. It wasn't about the lawsuit or the money. It was about the people we'd helped. The lives changed by patience and purpose. I sat there for a while, thinking about all the years he'd quietly built that savings account. Never saying a word, just trusting the process. I used to think he was too careful, too cautious. Now I understood. He wasn't afraid of risk. He just believed in time. When I got home that evening, I checked the mail. There was a letter with no return address. Inside was a small card with one sentence written in careful handwriting. It said, "I'm glad you found your way. Ethan." No signature. But I knew it was from Melissa. I smiled, slipped it into the frame behind my father's letter, and let it stay there. As summer faded into fall, the program expanded again. We partnered with local schools, built online courses, and reached people outside Texas. I didn't measure success in money anymore. I measured it in names, in faces, in small victories. Sometimes I still dream about that first day in the bank, sitting across from Patricia, hearing those numbers for the first time. But the part that sticks with me most isn't the money. It's the moment she handed me the letter. The realization that my father had believed in me even when I had nothing left to believe in. That belief changed everything. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that value doesn't fade with time. It grows, even in the dark, even when no one's watching. So if you're still waiting for your moment, if you feel like life has passed you by, remember this: you're not too late. You're not too old. You're just in the part of the story where patience does its work. And when your time comes, you'll know. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment. Tell me your story. Or just stay a while. Because maybe what grows slow isn't weakness at all. Maybe it's the strongest thing there is.